Hi, my name is Benedict. With this video I wanted to walk you through Space Tone, which is a new addition to the Space Case collection. I've just added this, so if you're one of those people who already had the collection but didn't get Space Tone, send me a message and I'll send you the new link. Space Tone, as it suggests, is a kind of EQ unit, but I hesitate to call it an EQ because the way it behaves is significantly different enough that if you come in thinking that you're going to get a straight EQ, you could get a nasty surprise, or you could get a really pleasant surprise. Let's start by looking at drums. Normally I don't look at drums so much, but let's start by looking at drums because it's a great way of seeing what the unit can do. Oh, warning, I'm listening using Jane's $15 Australian Skype cans, which means they're probably about $10 US, so as you appreciate, they are, from a musician's perspective, garbage. Quite a functional little set of cans, but it does mean that I can't really hear what I'm doing in any subtlety. So if I seem to settle on sounds that you think are a bit off, probably just because I can't hear it properly. Let's get back to it. So as you see there, just by adjusting the combination of the levels, by tilting, and I'll explain the levels and the tilts in just a moment, as well as by adding peaks, we can change how we hear and therefore how we perceive that drum loop quite dramatically. That's a relatively simple drum loop. If you've got one that's got extra percussive bits and pieces in it, then you can really pick out particular details and or lose other details, which is often a great thing because a loop is a pretty static thing, so you're either going to want to make it move, which this will give you the ability to do, or you're going to want to be able to pick out certain elements or make certain elements disappear so that it balances better with other things that you've got in your mix. So that's where this struck me as really rather shining. Now, as I said, I'm not exactly known for playing around with drum loops, and I really only did this because I was playing around and sort of thought, oh, well, and what happens if I do that? And I was quite surprised with the dramatic results that I got, and it made me sort of think, wow, this is a lot cooler than I intended for it to be, because I really designed for it to work on instruments, which we'll play with in a moment. So basically, as you see, you've got level controls for low, mid and high. As you probably noticed, reducing low to nothing so we can pick and choose the level overall. Rather than being a boost and cut, it actually goes from 0 to up to 3 or 6 times the actual level. And you might think, oh, but normally an EQ is supposed to work in so many dB. It probably does, but I don't care. This is a very destructive, colourful unit, so you can go to 0, which means that if you were in one of those DJ situations where you want to cut out particular frequency bands, you can. It just will make them go away because this band is no longer playing. As you hear, no bands are playing at all here. So we've got input here, but we've got no output. There we go, we've got something that sits in that range. So what we have here is a low pass, just as you're used to in a synthesizer. We have a mid pass. So that's part of why it's so good at picking out particular parts of a mix. And a high pass. So that means it's chopping off everything below that cutoff. Whoop, gone. So architecturally inside, it inputs your sound in stereo. It sends that sound then to these 3 separate filters, takes the output of those 3 separate filters and glues them back together on the other end, with this being the balance faders for each one of those filters. Now, anybody who's had much to do with filters will realize that there is a shocking flaw in this design, which I think is part of the reason why it works so well, in that between your low and your mid, you've actually got a dip. There's a gap there. The same here, there's a gap here. To me, that's what's made this unit work so well, because it's completely non-linear. Rather than having the ability to treat all frequencies as sort of equal until you decide to boost or cut something, it's already said, no, we're going to create these dips in the middle of our signal with a spike in the middle of it. That works beautifully because in real life there is really no such thing as a straight line. Nature works on curves, and there are so few things in nature that are actually square. If you know much about rockology, then you might say, oh, Benedict iron pyrite cubes, they're square. Yeah, they are. But to have a single iron pyrite cube that's perfectly square is very rare. If you know what they look like, and I'll try and dig you up a picture, then they look more like a square city, Pueblo city climbing up a mountain. There are straight lines, but in the bigger picture it's a lot more complex. Nature, the human ear, the human brain, likes things that are non-linear. So what this tone unit, this EQ, is doing is actually adding in curves and wobbliness that wasn't there before. So tilt, as you've worked out, is merely just a way of universally shifting those cutoff points. The gap between each of those filters is effectively kept the same. This works on octaves, so the octave gap between each of those is kept the same, and that's what your tilt does. So it just moves everything more to the bass end or more to the treble end. Peak is, as you've probably worked out, a resonance. So you can turn it right down, in which case there's less definition between these bands, or more definition right up to self-oscillation. I considered, should I cut it off before it starts to self-oscillate, but I thought, no, sooner or later someone is going to come up with a cool use for that self-oscillation, so why should I cut that off? It's a thing that it'll do. It's a thing you don't want it to do most of the time, but it's a thing that it will sometimes do. So my 2 cents, as always, is make sure you are using a limiter when you're playing around with this, because it can and will get nasty. And speaking of nasty, you can use it to drive, and clip that. Drive doesn't go to 0, it goes to half of the input level, input in this case being the level that you have created here. So you can be creating a lot of level if you put each of these onto boost and turns them up. It's possible that you're already in clip, nature of the beast. But you can reduce that, so if you've got a little bit of clip that you didn't really want and you don't want to adjust these, then you can just lower that a little bit. It's really just taking a few dB off the top, which is hopefully enough just to stop the clip. Now the clip knob works from, because the way the signals work is you've got your line in the middle, which is 0, and then your signal goes above and below. That's just how your waveform works. You're probably used to that from looking at waveforms. So the clipper here says I'm just going to chop it off when it reaches a certain level. Now the simple way to do a clip is to merely get closer and closer to the 0 or the crossover point, and therefore you've got less signal, and of course it's making it more of a square wave, just chopping the tops off. But you can get far more interesting sounds if that clip is done asymmetrically. So obviously that is pretty aggressive, but in the right situations you'll find that with drum loops and things, it can definitely give you a nice little in parts of the sounds, or just go straight to Splatsville. Entirely up to you as to what you want to do with that. The main control here goes from 0. Again, unusual. Normally this would be a trim control, plus minus so many dB, so balance up what you're doing here. But I thought, well, no, look, a lot of times I would like to use that to allow me to fade this in and out of the mix. So rather than having to rely on my fader, on my mixing desk, or my SSL in Reason, I like to be able to do most of my mix decisions from here. So rather than sort of saying, oh, you can only adjust your gain by 12 dB because it's a trim, I'm saying you can take that to nothing or double the volume. So similar to what you use, just behaves differently, gives you an extra feature that you can use this for. So that's shown you basically how this works and given you a sense of how it can work on drums. You can spend a lot more time playing with each drum kit and pulling things out. I actually spent an inordinate amount of time, for me, running through Rex loops going, oh wow, isn't that cool, oh wow, that would be more useful. So by all means, go right ahead and do that. We'll get these out of the way now. Delete. Bye-bye. Thank you very much. Just going to turn that on and clear it. So now we've got the roper. Now this, when I was starting to work on Space Tone, I was thinking about instruments, particularly synthesizer instruments, and how can I make them seem more old and dusty and dirty and cool and engaging. The reason I picked Europa for this is because it was just released as a VST, and I popped over to KVR to see how they were taking it, and oh geez, there were some really interesting things being said about it. Things like, oh, it's got that typical propeller head Reason sound, oh, it needs oversampling, it sounds no good. They've got their usual 8-bit sound. Okay, whatever. What these people are talking about and not understanding is that propeller heads, and I'm not being fanboy or defensive, there are pluses and minuses in this situation, but I'm showing you how Space Tone will be able to solve this. Propeller heads, when they make an instrument, or every device, tends to treat all the frequencies equally. It's not saying there are bad frequencies or good frequencies. It's just saying, here's what this instrument does, here is all of it evenly. And now it's up to you how you want to modify that, which is great. It makes the instruments more versatile if you put in the work. A lot of instruments in VST land create their sound. So I'm completely confident that DAWs, some of the actual workstation environments, have a frequency curve attached in them, that they've already decided there are certain frequencies, oh, you don't want to hear these, so we'll get rid of them for you. It's nice. When you turn the unit on, immediately it sounds nice and big and juicy and fruity. But the downside is that everything that you output from that will have that sonic footprint on it already. Reason, yes, it can have a sonic footprint if you don't do the work, but you can do the work. So we'll take a very reason soundy sound. We'll turn on space tone. Whether that's the right change to the sound, that's up to you. This delay, because it is difficult to listen to a very dry sound. It's a bit uncomfortable. Obviously, using Space Delay 101, I haven't added any extra LFOing or anything. We've got the shorter delay off. It's just a pair of delays, slightly panned out, put in the mix, just to give us some. So it makes the sound much nicer. We'll play it. So let's say that's a frequency that I want to pick more out of in my sound. I can then decide, am I looking for accentuating highs in this based on a mix, or I want to accentuate lows or body. Now you may think that, ooh, gee, that sounds a bit eh. Again, we're ignoring genre preferences, but as a brass sound, that's actually going to cut through the mix really, really nicely. If you wanted to play with bass sounds, that's just not really anything in that sound up there. Compared to it's very polite. We should reduce the volume here. That's given the sound a lot more character. In this case, we've added a lot of belly. There's a lot of fat meatiness out of our lows here. We can get rid of some of that if we want. Bring in a tiny little bit of clipping. Again, that's all comes to taste of what you want to do. And that's emphasizing a real subbiness in the sand. Obviously you need to take care how you put that in your mix, but it's changed the timbre of the sand quite a lot. So there are all your basics of what you're likely to do with space tone, but then there are some more things that we can do. Let's add some more layers here. Detune that. Right, now we've flown these in already, so we can take this and assign it to tilt. Turn it back on. Yes, I created a phaser. I've done this a couple of times with EQs by creating these little notches, which is what we've got between these. And it can sound great, but it's a pain and a lot of work to make. I didn't design this with that in mind, but as soon as I twisted the tilt knob, I realized, geez, I've invented a phaser. And I think a rather nice sounding one at that. It's probably 2 poles or something like that, because we've got two little holes in our comb filter. But it's a nice fella to have. Remember, we can get quite aggressive with those peaks, but unlike a lot of phasers, it's an awfully flat and straight sound. It's a nice sound, It's awfully flat and straight. So there we've added some adjustment to the tone and some movement to the tone, which you may not have thought to do, but I think it's really, really interesting to hear that in a mix. Would be like, oh, gee, listen to what they did there. That's super cool. It's going to catch the ear because it's doing something unusual. Yes, you can be a lot safer by not using a square wave. That's unusual, but I kind of liked it. It was cool that somehow I have to remember to do a little bit later. So phaser, something you didn't really see coming, probably. The other thing that we can do with this sound happening there. Nice, but again very flat and dry. If we want those highs back, we can just dial them back in. That makes that instrument feel a lot more real than if it's this. Sure, this is a lot louder, so maybe I should reduce that a bit more. Little bits of drive clipping. Again, I'm probably not hearing them right here, but you get those little bits of drive right, rather than saying, oh, they're bad things. They're actually great things. You listen to those records that from the 60s and 70s and even the early 80s, which sound so great, is because they have little things like that in them. The engineers didn't automatically go, oh, no, that's no good. They're bad things. They simply looked at the overall result and said, hey, this sounds really alive. It sounds warm, it sounds deep. And those are the decisions that you make, and something like Space Tone can help you with that because it's a complete opposite of what almost all of your other devices are trying to do for you. There's one other thing that I found myself making with this, a little unexpectedly again, but it was something we didn't really see coming. Let's just set up the core sound. Nice enough. So let's assign these to low, to high. I'll show you what I've got in a moment on the back. And to mid. Let's pull these all back just to the center volume. Oops, we might have got an assignment wrong there. Mid gain, that's what I'm looking for. Nice guitar-y sort of sound, not very detailed, kind of flat. That's good. What we've got here with the wiring is we've got 1 and 2, CBs 1 and 2, which are going in the positive direction, CB3 which is going in the negative direction. Now you'll notice that I wired them backwards. Let's just slow them down. So at the moment, we've used this as a tremolo device. But if I take this and now flip it around, we'll slow this down, going in opposite directions. That's different. It's quite a charming sound. We can change the peaking. Or there's no reason why we can't play around with unusual sounds. A longer sound, a paddy type sound, that would probably sound quite cool. So what if we took this now and applied that fella to tilt? Something you wouldn't be getting out of a normal EQ unit. So that probably covers enough. We've gone through the basics. We've gone through some of the ideas that we could use by flying in other devices and breaking it or using it in unexpected ways. And it gives us the opportunity to do lots of different things. So Space Tone from the Space Case collection. The whole collection is only $5. More if you feel inclined. Obviously, I'm very flattered when I do get more. So there will be a link in the video here. Please pop over, have a look at all the units there. Have a look at the other videos which are on the support stuff page. And that'll give you a sense of what you get in the collection of units. I'm planning, this is probably the last video that I'm making for this collection, because I think I've basically covered everything. See if that is something that can make things better for you. Oh, if you're wanting to test it, there is another device that's not actually literally inside the collection, but it's part of it. It's called Space String. It's quite an advanced little string synthesizer. There's another video on that as well. You can actually download that free, see if it works in your environment and works for you. Yeah, hopefully you find that Space Case is of some value for you. If not, watching these videos hopefully has given you some ideas of what you can do with the devices that you do have. So thanks very much for your time and attention.